Hi, today I'm going to show you how to simulate optical flow or parallax using 2D tile maps in Unity 3D 2018. If you have a project where you want to keep the orthographic camera and want to use 2D tile maps for your backgrounds, this video is for you. Almost all of the videos I found on creating the parallax effect in Unity focus on using game objects, sprites, and switching the camera from orthographic to perspective. However, for my project, I want to procedurally generate my backgrounds in 2D tile maps, so this presented a challenge. How do you go about creating the parallax effect with 2D tile map backgrounds? Follow along and I'll show you how simple it is. Let's start by opening Unity, creating new project. So let's set up our scene. First, we're going to need a couple tile maps. The first tile map will be the foreground, and the second tile map will be the background. Create 2D object tile map. This creates our grid and a basic tile map. We'll rename this to foreground, and we'll duplicate this and rename it background. Now that we have our tile maps, we need something to put on them. So let's create a folder for our sprites. And within that, I'm going to create a folder for our tiles. Now, we need to drag in our sprites. I've created 3 images that are 256 by 256 and just some colors on them, blue, brown, and green. I'm going to drag these into my sprite folder. There we go. Then I'm going to come over here, and if you don't already have the tile palette window available, you can go to Window, 2D, Tile Palette. That should open this tile palette window. Next, we need to create a new tile palette. We'll just call this Tile Palette. When we click Create, it's going to ask us where. I'm going to put that in the Tiles folder. Then we can we're going to take our 3 sprites and drag them in there. Before we do that, one of the things we want to do is make sure that we have our pixels per unit set correctly. These were 256 by 256. So we're going to change all 3 of these by selecting all 3, set it to 256, and click Apply. Now we can drag them in, and you can see it's going to drop them wherever I pick. We'll go ahead and save the tiles themselves into the tiles folder. And there we have it. 3 tiles based on those 3 sprites. Now we need to go ahead and paint our foreground and our background. Let's start with the foreground. I like to select it so I can see the grid. Then I come in here and make sure that I'm painting or on the active tile map as foreground. I'm going to grab green and select the fill tool. This allows us to select a large box and fill the area without having to do a lot of one-on-one painting. There we go. I'll just make it about that big. Put a couple little bumps here so that when I move it around, it's easy to tell that we're moving. Now we're going to go to the background and make sure we're on the background. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and use the brown, and we'll go ahead and create something that looks like buildings. You'll notice here that we're covering some of our green. We'll go ahead and fix that by changing the rendering layer within the tile map. So with the background selected, now that I've got it painted, I'm going to come in here. It's on the same sorting layer for the render as the foreground. They're both on default. And what we're going to do now is adjust this order in the layer to be lower than the foreground. Anything lower is going to be in the background. Anything higher is going to be in the foreground. So if I wanted to make this 10, that would put the background behind it. I like to use negatives just because it makes it easier for me. So with the background selected, I'll set this to -1. That moves it behind. There we go. And that's what we wanted. Now that we have the foreground and background tile map set up, let's see what happens when we move the camera. I'm going to select the game window, select the move tool, make sure I'm selecting the main camera. I want to grab the X coordinates and move back and forth, no parallax. So let's go ahead and add that. To do that, we're going to select the background and add a script. So let's add a component, new script, and we'll call this Tilemap Parallax. Now that that's attached, we'll open it using Visual Studio. Now, because we're going to be working with tile maps, first thing we need to do is add using Unity engine dot tilemaps. Then we're going to need 3 variables, 2 of which we need to be able to access in the editor. So we need a variable for the scroll speed, the game object that we're going to track as the object that's moving for the perspective, and a tile map. So let's start with the serialized field, which allows us to see it in the editor. It's going to be a float, and we'll call this scroll speed. We're going to set this to 0.3. The next one is going to be a game object, and this will be the view target. This is usually going to be the camera. And the last one we need is a tile map, and we'll call it tile map. This will be a handle to the actual tile map component. So let's go ahead and grab that. In the start, we're going to do tile map equals get component tile map. There we go. Next, what we're going to want to do is create a new X and Y position for the tile map. To do this, we'll do it on update, and we'll create a float new X position equals view target transform position dot X. That would be the target that we're looking at, which is the camera. But we want to move our tile map slower than the camera. So to do that, we're just going to multiply it by the scroll speed. There we go. We'll do the same thing for the y-axis. New y position. So this will be view target transform position dot y. We'll also multiply that by scroll speed. Now all we need to do is update the position of our tile map. So to do that, we're going to do tile map dot transform position. This is going to equal a new vector 3, and we're going to use new X position, new Y position, and since we're not doing anything in the Z-axis because we're working with 2D, we'll set that to the same tile map dot transform dot position dot Z. Let's go ahead and save this, and we'll switch back to Unity. Wait for it to update. Now that it's updated, we can see that we have our scroll speed that we can modify, and we have a view target. Let's pull the main camera in as our view target. There we go. Now we have the main camera attached. Let's test it out. Click play. I'll grab my camera, and let's move this back and forth. As you can see, the foreground stays put, and the background is moving with the camera, but at a very reduced rate. This creates the parallax effect that we're looking for on the x-axis, and if we try the y-axis, it also works as well. Now in this case, the way I've set it up, the y-axis doesn't really make much sense. So let's make a little bit of a change and make it so we only do the x. I'll switch back to my script. In here, I'm going to add a serialized field. This will be a Boolean, and we'll just call this x only. I'm going to set this to true as a default so that anytime you use the script by default, it'll only work on the x-axis. To do this, I'm going to use an if statement to check if the Boolean value is true or false. So if x only, if this is true, we want to do just our x-axis. Else, if it's false, we're going to do what we were doing before. So let's grab this, move it up, and then we'll take the same line here, we'll paste it in there, and instead of doing the y position, whenever the x only variable is set to true, we'll set this back to the tilemap transform position y. Now we're only affecting the x-axis if that's true, and we're affecting both axes if it's false. Let's save it, go back to Unity, click on our background, see that our script is updated, we have the x only. We're going to leave that on, and I'm going to press play. Let's select the main camera and move on the x-axis. We get what we expect, which is the parallax effect on the x. Let's try moving the y-axis. Now we notice it's only affecting the area that we want. What if we wanted two backgrounds? Let's try that out. I'm going to duplicate the background. I'm going to rename this one background far. Now we have two backgrounds, a background and the background far. We need to make them different so that we can tell them apart. So I'm going to go back to my tile palette. I'm going to select background far. I'm going to actually hide our background and our foreground. Now I can see what I'm working with. So on the active tile map, make sure I'm on background far, grab my erase tool, and let's just erase these guys. Good. Now we're going to select a different color. I'll turn my other layers back on so I can see what I'm working with. Select my color, my brush, and actually we'll go ahead and do it as a fill so that we can create some tall buildings like this. All right, just a few tall buildings. We'll make sure that goes all the way down. There we go. We have tall buildings. Let's just check our far background. And one of the things we want to do is make sure that it is always behind the others. The background here was -1. We're going to make this -2. This ensures that no matter how we move the screen or the camera, that it's always behind. Okay, let's go to the game view, click play, grab our camera, and let's move along the x-axis. So we notice they're moving, and we're getting the parallax effect, but they're moving at the same rate as the other background. Well, there's a way to fix that. We can create an offset. Let's go ahead and do that. So since we're using the same script for both backgrounds, let's just edit the script and add an offset. In the script, what we're going to do is add another variable. We'll do this also as a serialized field. It'll be a float, and we'll just call this offset. We're going to set this to 0. We want to set this to 0 as a default value because when we drop our script on, if we're only using 1, we don't want to have an offset, making things a little weird. We can edit this in the editor. Now that we have our offset, we need to figure out how we're going to use the offset. The easiest way is to take the scroll speed and add the offset to it before we multiply. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to add the offset, and we'll do the same thing for the other one. We want to make sure our X and Y are doing the same thing. There we go. Save our script. Let's jump back to Unity, and now that it's updated, we can see that we have the offset. We don't want to change the background, which is our near background. We want the far background And let's change this to 0.5. I'm going to press play, grab our main camera, and check on the x-axis. That looks pretty good. Now, if you don't like it and you want it to seem different, you can always adjust the values. And this is how I've achieved the parallax effect on 2D tile maps using an orthographic camera in Unity 3D 2018. I hope this has been helpful.